After I lost my company, my wife packed up and said, "Failure isn't attractive." I started donating blood for cash. The nurse looked at the results, shaking. "Sir, you have RH null. It's worth millions." Then the doctor came in. "A dying billionaire needs your blood." When they ran my DNA, they found something shocking. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. When your wife tells you that failure isn't attractive, she's not talking about your entrepreneurial setbacks or your temporary cash flow problems or whatever corporate buzzword you want to slap on being completely, utterly, spectacularly broke. No, when Laura said those three words to me while standing in our, well, formerly our living room, with her arms crossed, and that look on her face like she'd just discovered I'd been secretly a registered sex offender this whole time, she meant me, the whole package. Travis Holt, the man, the myth, the absolute disaster. She wasn't critiquing my business acumen or my investment strategies. She was looking at me the way you look at expired milk, with genuine disgust and a strong desire to get it out of the house as quickly as possible before the smell gets worse. And honestly, I couldn't even blame her. One foreclosure, two lawsuits, and a truck repossession later, the woman packed her Louis Vuitton luggage. And yes, I'm talking about the real stuff, not the knockoffs they sell on street corners that fall apart after 3 uses. Like she was evacuating a natural disaster zone, which, in fairness, I kind of was. I'd become a walking, talking tornado of financial ruin, except tornadoes at least have the decency to be over quickly. My implosion had been a slow motion train wreck that took 18 months to fully crash and burn, giving everyone plenty of time to grab popcorn and watch the show. She didn't even cry when she left. Just clicked those designer heels across our hardwood floors, floors we were 3 months behind on paying for, by the way, and walked out like she was leaving a bad restaurant. Didn't even leave a tip. That's how I ended up sitting in a plasma donation center on a Thursday afternoon, stomach growling so loud the guy next to me asked if I'd brought my dog, hoping against hope that my blood was worth $50 and maybe, if I was really lucky, a coupon for a free sandwich or something. My name's Travis Holt, and I used to be the CEO of Holt Demolition, a company I built from the ground up with my own two hands, a dream, and a small business loan that seemed reasonable at the time. Keyword there being former CEO, because apparently the demolition business is a lot like a game of Jenga. You pull out the wrong piece, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Except in my case, the wrong piece was trusting my CFO, who turned out to be embezzling funds to support his gambling addiction. But hey, live and learn, right? Except I did all the living and not enough learning because here I was. 6 months ago, I was signing million-dollar contracts in conference rooms with views that made you feel like God Himself was giving you a high five. I wore custom suits, drove a truck that cost more than most people's houses, and had a secretary named Deborah who knew my coffee order better than I did. Now I'm selling literal pieces of myself, my blood, my plasma, whatever they wanted to stick a needle in and extract, just to keep the lights on in my brother's basement, where I'd been crashing since the foreclosure. My brother Kenny, bless his heart, had been cool about the whole thing, but I could see it in his eyes every time I shuffled upstairs for dinner. That mixture of pity and relief, pity that I'd fallen so far, relief that it wasn't him. He'd gotten the sensible gene in the family, became an accountant, married a nice woman named Patricia, who made casseroles that all tasted vaguely the same. Meanwhile, I'd swung for the fences and struck out so hard, I ended up in a different zip code. The plasma center smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams, which is probably what they were going for as a brand identity. The waiting room had those plastic chairs that are specifically designed to be uncomfortable enough that you can't fall asleep, but not so uncomfortable that you leave. And a TV in the corner playing daytime talk shows where people screamed at each other about paternity tests. Real uplifting stuff. The other donors looked like they'd all taken wrong turns at various points in their lives and ended up here, in this fluorescent lit purgatory, trading bodily fluids for grocery money. There was an older guy with a nose tube who looked like he'd been coming here since plasma donation was invented. A woman in her 30s who kept checking her phone like she was expecting a call that would save her from all this. And a kid who couldn't have been more than 21, with those face tattoos that guarantee you'll never work anywhere that requires a name tag. When the nurse finally called my name, Travis Holt, I practically jumped up like I'd won the lottery, which tells you everything you need to know about where my life was at. The nurse was young, maybe mid 20s, with that aggressively cheerful demeanor that people in medical professions develop as a defense mechanism against the crushing reality of human suffering. Her name tag said Mia, and she had a smile that was probably genuine at some point in nursing school, but had since been plastered on like wallpaper. She led me to one of those reclining chairs that are trying really hard to be comfortable, but just end up making you feel like you're at the dentist, and started prepping my arm with the efficiency of someone who'd done this about 10,000 times. First time donating? She asked, swabbing my inner elbow with something cold that smelled like rubbing alcohol and regret. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual, like I was just doing this for fun, and not because my bank account had $47 in it and I needed to buy toilet paper. Figured I'd see what all the fuss was about. Plus, I heard the juice and cookies at the end are to die for. She laughed, a real laugh, which made me feel slightly less pathetic, and said, well, the cookies are pretty good. Can't promise they're life changing, but they're free, so there's that. When she pricked my arm with the needle, and let me tell you, whoever designed these needles definitely wasn't thinking about making the experience pleasant. I decided to lean into the humor, because if you can't laugh when you're literally selling your blood to survive, when can you laugh? Please tell me my blood's at least the good kind, I said, watching the dark red liquid start flowing through the tube like some kind of biological ATM transaction. Maybe vintage red or something fancy that you'd see on a wine menu. I'd hate to find out I've been walking around with discount blood this whole time. Mia smiled at that, smiled until she took the sample vial over to the microscope at her station and looked at whatever she saw under there. Then her face went pale, and I'm talking the kind of pale you see in horror movies, right before someone says, we need to get out of here now. She looked at the microscope, then at me, then back at the microscope like she was hoping it would tell her something different the second time around. It was the same expression I imagined my accountant had when he first saw my credit score after everything fell apart. Pure, unadulterated disbelief, mixed with a healthy dose of, how is this even possible? Sir, and the fact that she'd switched from calling me Travis to Sir was not a good sign. Please don't move, just stay right there, okay? Now, I've heard a lot of concerning phrases in my life. I've heard we need to talk, I've heard the bank called again, I've heard Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. But something about the way she said, please don't move, while staring at my blood like it had just confessed to a crime, made my stomach drop. This wasn't the voice of someone who'd found something mildly interesting. This was the voice of someone who'd just discovered something that was either really good or really bad, with absolutely no middle ground. She grabbed her phone, her personal phone, not the work phone, and made a call. Dr. Brenner, I need you at Station 3 immediately. Like, right now. Yes, I know you're on lunch. This can't wait. She hung up and went back to staring at the microscope like it was a crystal ball showing her the future. And whatever future she was seeing definitely had me in it somehow. I tried to make another joke. If this ends with me turning into Spider-Man, I'm honestly fine with that. Just no Twilight stuff. I can't handle being a sparkly vampire. I'm already depressed enough. But my voice came out shakier than I intended. The old man with the nose tube in the recliner next to me, who'd apparently been listening to this whole exchange with the interest of someone who didn't have Netflix at home, let out a laugh that turned into a cough. You'll wish it was Spider-Man, son, he wheezed, like he knew something I didn't, which was becoming a very uncomfortable theme in my life lately. The thing about waiting for a doctor to tell you what's wrong with your blood is that your brain immediately goes to the worst possible places, and I mean the absolute darkest corners of WebMD hell. I'm sitting there in this pleather recliner that's sticking to my arms, watching Mia, the nurse who'd gone from cheerful to completely freaked out in about 30 seconds flat, hover over that microscope like she's watching a horror movie through the lens, and all I can think about is every terrible disease I've ever heard of. Leukemia, AIDS, that weird thing where your blood turns into actual sludge. Ebola, maybe? Can you get Ebola in Kansas? Probably not. But my luck had been so astronomically bad lately that I wouldn't have been surprised if I'd somehow contracted a tropical disease while sitting in my brother's basement, eating expired Hot Pockets and watching reruns of The Price is Right. Dr. Brenner showed up about 3 minutes later, and let me tell you, This guy looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone named Dr. Brenner, who works at a plasma donation center. Mid-60s, gray hair that was trying its best to cover a bald spot, glasses that had probably been in style sometime during the Reagan administration, and that specific kind of rumpled appearance that says, I've seen some stuff in my medical career and I'm too tired to care about ironing anymore. He was carrying half a sandwich, looked like turkey and Swiss on wheat, in case you were wondering. And he had that annoyed expression people get when they're interrupted during lunch, which I completely understood because I'd barely eaten anything today except a banana that was probably 2 days past its prime. What have we got, Mia? He asked, setting his sandwich down on a paper towel like he was planning to come right back to it, which meant this probably wasn't going to take long. Either I was fine and Mia had overreacted, or I was dying and there was no point in lengthy explanations. Both options seemed equally plausible at this point. Mia gestured frantically at the microscope. Just look. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I thought maybe the equipment was malfunctioning, so I ran it twice. Same results both times. Dr. Brenner sighed the way my high school principal used to sigh before telling me I had detention again, then leaned over and peered into the microscope. I watched his expression change in real time, going from mildly annoyed to confused to what I can only describe as the look a prospector gets when he finds gold in a river. His eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might actually leave his face entirely and start their own life somewhere else. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered, which was absolutely not what you want to hear from a medical professional examining your blood. Mr. Holt, I need to ask you something. Have you ever donated blood before? Ever been tested for blood type beyond the basic ABO stuff? I shook my head, suddenly very aware of the needle still stuck in my arm, and the tube still pulling blood out of me like a vampire with a subscription service. No, man. I mean, I knew I was O negative because they told me that once in high school when we did that health class thing where they prick your finger and you nearly pass out in front of everyone. But that's it. Why? Is there a problem? Because I've got to be honest with you, Doc. I'm running out of organs to sell, and blood was kind of my last resort here. Dr. Brenner straightened up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't pity exactly, and it wasn't concern. It was more like the way people look at lottery tickets before they scratch them off, like possibility mixed with disbelief. Mr. Holt, you don't have regular O negative blood. You have Rh null blood. Do you know what that is? I blinked at him. Is that like a bad thing? Because it sounds like a Wi-Fi password somebody made up after 3 margaritas. Or maybe an error code on my computer. Null. Null. Like file not found, but for blood. The old guy next to me with the nose tube started laughing again, that wheezy sound that suggested he'd smoked about 1,000,000 cigarettes in his lifetime and regretted maybe 12 of them. Kid's got no idea, he rasped. Tell him, Doc. Tell him what he's sitting on. Mia had pulled out her phone and was frantically typing something, her thumbs moving so fast across the screen I thought she might be having some kind of seizure. There are only about 43 documented cases in the entire world, she said, reading from whatever website she'd pulled up. 43 people on the entire planet. That's rarer than like every rare disease combined. That's rarer than people who've been to space. That's extremely valuable, Dr. Brenner interrupted. And the way he said valuable made something in my chest tighten. Not in a good way either. More in a, oh God, what fresh hell is this kind of way. Mr. Holt, Renault blood is called golden blood in the medical community. It's universal for transfusions in a way that even regular O negative isn't. It can be given to anyone with rare blood types. It's extraordinary, frankly. I sat there processing this information while my blood continued draining into a bag, which suddenly felt a lot more significant than it had 5 minutes ago. Okay, so let me get this straight. I'm walking around with the rarest blood type on Earth, literally more rare than getting struck by lightning while winning the lottery, and I've been using it for, what? Pumping through my body while I eat gas station hot dogs and worry about student loan debt? That's what we're saying here? Essentially, yes, Dr. Brenner said. And I swear to God he was trying not to smile, like this was the most interesting thing that had happened to him since he started working at a place where people traded plasma for pizza money. Though I should mention that having Rh null blood comes with its own complications, and if you ever need a transfusion yourself, finding a match would be nearly impossible. You'd essentially have to have your own blood stored for emergencies. Great. I said, laughing because the alternative was screaming or possibly crying, and I'd already cried enough this year to fill a small swimming pool. So I've got blood that's worth a fortune to everyone except me. That tracks perfectly with how my life's been going, honestly. It's like being a lottery ticket that can't cash itself in, a vending machine full of money that only takes exact change. Mr. Holt, Mia interrupted, her phone now pressed to her ear. I need to make some calls. There are medical registries, research facilities, blood banks that specialize in rare types. They're going to want to know about this. Some of them pay for donations, especially for types like yours. We're talking significant compensation. The word compensation made my ears perk up like a dog hearing a treat bag open. Define significant. Are we talking buy a nice dinner significant or pay my brother's electric bill significant? Because I'm interested in either, honestly, but I'd like to know what tier of broke I'm about to potentially not be anymore. Dr. Brenner exchanged a look with Mia, one of those meaningful glances that people share when they know something you don't, and they're trying to decide how much to tell you. Let's just say that people with your blood type have been known to receive substantial offers for donations. We're talking thousands per donation, potentially tens of thousands depending on the recipient and circumstances. And there are people out there, wealthy people with rare blood conditions, who would pay almost anything for access to blood like yours. I felt my mouth go dry, which was ironic, considering I was literally in the process of having fluids removed from my body. Thousands? Like multiple thousands? With an S at the end? For blood that my body just makes? Automatically? For free? Yes, Dr. Brenner said simply, and I watched him pull out his own phone from his white coat pocket. In fact, if you're willing, I'd like to contact a colleague of mine who specializes in rare blood types. There might be opportunities here that could benefit both you and people in desperate need. Before I could respond, before I could fully process the fact that the universe had apparently decided to throw me the weirdest life preserver in the history of drowning men, his phone rang. Not the call he was about to make, but an incoming call that made his face do something complicated when he looked at the screen. He answered it, stepping a few feet away, but I could still hear fragments of his conversation. Medical jargon mostly, words like phenotype and compatibility and immediate need. But then he said something that made my stomach flip. Yes, I understand. From overseas? How soon can they get here? He hung up and turned back to me, and his expression had changed completely. Now he looked like a man who just realized he was holding a winning lottery ticket that belonged to someone else. Mr. Holt, he said slowly, carefully, like he was explaining something to a child or possibly defusing a bomb, I need you to stay here for a little while longer. There's someone who wants to meet you. Someone who's been looking for a donor with your exact blood type. They're on their way now. So apparently, and I want you to really appreciate the cosmic joke here, Rach Knoll blood isn't just rare. It's the kind of rare that makes finding a needle in a haystack look like finding your keys on the kitchen counter where you left them. We're talking about a blood type so uncommon that there are literally more people who've climbed Mount Everest, more people who've won Olympic gold medals, more people who've been struck by lightning twice than people walking around with this stuff pumping through their veins. 43 documented cases in the entire world, on a planet with 8 billion people. I did the math on my phone while sitting there, and it came out to approximately 0.075% of the population, which is such a small number that my calculator actually gave me a look of disappointment for even asking. And here's the kicker, the absolute cherry on top of this absurd Sunday that my life had become. I'd been walking around with this biological gold mine in my circulatory system while I couldn't even afford a value meal at Taco Bell. I'd been rationing ramen noodles like I was preparing for the apocalypse, wearing socks with holes in them because new socks felt like an unnecessary luxury, and seriously considering whether I could make a pair of jeans last another month if I just avoided sitting down too much. Meanwhile, my body had been casually producing liquid that was apparently more valuable than printer ink, saffron, and probably human dignity combined. Dr. Brenner had pulled up a chair, actually sat down, which felt significant because doctors never sit down unless they're about to tell you something important or you're about to die, and I was really hoping it was the former, and started explaining the science behind it all. Something about antigens and proteins and cell surfaces, using words that I'm pretty sure he'd forgotten most people don't have medical degrees. I nodded along like I understood, the way you do when someone's explaining their crypto investment strategy at a party and you don't want to seem dumb. But honestly, the only part that was sticking was the phrase he kept repeating, liquid gold. Doctors and researchers literally call it liquid gold, Mr. Holt, he said, and I could see the excitement in his eyes. The kind of professional enthusiasm that people get when they stumble across something rare in their field. Like a paleontologist finding a dinosaur bone, or an accountant finding a receipt from 1987 that's been filed correctly. Your blood can save lives that other blood types simply can't. There are people with rare blood disorders, people with complex antibody situations, people who've had so many transfusions that their bodies reject everything except Rh null. You're walking around with the universal key to blood compatibility locked inside your cardiovascular system. I leaned back in the recliner, which squeaked in protest because apparently even furniture judged me now, and tried to wrap my head around this information. Cool, that's great, really amazing stuff, Doc. Super fascinating. But here's my question. Can we pawn it? Because my car insurance payment is due in 4 days, and I'm about $70 short, which is a very specific kind of hell where you're close enough to see salvation, but far enough away that you're definitely still going to get screwed. Mia, who'd been hovering nearby like a nurse who'd just discovered her patient was actually a celebrity in disguise, laughed at that. A real laugh, not the polite kind. You're taking this remarkably well, she said. Most people would be freaking out right now. Oh, I'm freaking out, I assured her. I'm just doing it internally because I've learned that external freaking out gets you escorted out of places by security. And I'd really like to finish this donation and get my 50 bucks. Also, I've had a really weird 6 months, so my baseline for normal reactions to shocking news is pretty much shot. You could tell me I was the secret heir to the British throne right now, and I'd probably just ask if it came with dental insurance. That's when Dr. Brenner's phone rang again. He looked at the screen and his eyebrows did that thing again where they tried to escape his face. He answered with a crisp, Dr. Brenner, then immediately shifted into serious professional mode. Yes, I have him here. The preliminary tests confirm it. Rh null, zero doubt. How far out are you? A pause while he listened, checking his watch. Understood. We'll be ready. He hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Excitement mixed with concern, maybe? Like he'd just realized he was in possession of something valuable, but wasn't sure what to do with it. Mr. Holt, he said carefully, there's someone coming to see you, someone from overseas who's been searching for a compatible donor. They'll be here within the hour. I blinked. Someone from overseas? Like from another country overseas? They're flying here right now to see me specifically? To see my blood? I looked down at my arm, at the needle, still drawing blood into a bag that now felt like it should have armed guards around it. Doc, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a guy who got divorced 3 months ago, lives in his brother's basement, and came here today because I needed grocery money. This feels like either the best thing that's ever happened to me or the opening scene of a horror movie where I get harvested for organs in a warehouse. I'm having trouble reading the vibe here. Dr. Brenner actually smiled at that, a real genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I can assure you this is legitimate. The person coming to meet you represents a very wealthy family with a member in critical condition. They have been searching through international blood registries for months. When I contacted my colleague about your case, the information made its way to them within minutes. They're desperate, Mr. Holt, and they have the resources to compensate you very, very well for your help. The old man with the nose tube next to me, who'd been following this conversation like it was his personal soap opera, wheezed out another laugh. Kid, you better ask for $1 million. Hell, ask for 2. People like that have more money than God, and they need what you got. Don't let them lowball you just because you're broke. I appreciate the negotiating advice from the peanut gallery, I said, but honestly, he had a point. My business might have collapsed, my marriage might have imploded, and my dignity might have evacuated the premises about 4 months ago. But I'd negotiated $1 million contracts before. I knew how desperation worked. I'd been the desperate one enough times recently to recognize it in others. And if someone was flying in from overseas within an hour of finding out about me, that was desperation with a capital D and probably several exclamation points. Mia brought me a juice box, cranberry, which felt weirdly fancy for a plasma center, and one of those cookies she'd promised earlier. Chocolate chip, slightly stale, but honestly, it tasted like the best thing I'd eaten in weeks because it was free, and I hadn't had to steal it from Kenny's pantry while he was at work. You should eat something, she said. Keep your strength up. You've already given more blood than we usually take in a first donation. Yeah, well, apparently I've got blood to spare, I said, biting into the cookie and trying not to think about how weird this all was. 43 people in the world, and I'm one of them. What are the odds? I can't win a scratch-off lottery ticket to save my life, but I hit the genetic jackpot for the most obscure blood type in human history. That's so perfectly on brand for my luck that I'm not even surprised anymore. Dr. Brenner had stepped away to make more calls, speaking in low tones that I couldn't quite hear, but that sounded important and medical. Through the windows of the plasma center, I could see the parking lot, the regular world going about its regular business. People pumping gas across the street at the Shell station, a mom pulling her kid out of a minivan, a FedEx truck making a delivery. Normal life happening to normal people with normal blood types who didn't have mysterious overseas visitors flying in to meet them. I finished my cookie and checked my phone. 3 texts from Kenny asking if I'd be home for dinner. Patricia was making meatloaf, apparently, which was her specialty in the sense that she made it every Thursday and it was consistently mediocre. 1 text from my dad asking how the plasma thing went, because I'd mentioned I was doing this and he'd been worried it was dangerous or a scam. And 1 text from Laura, my ex-wife, which I'd gotten 2 hours ago, but hadn't had the emotional energy to open until now. Heard from Deborah, you're selling plasma now. That's a new low, even for you. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling the familiar cocktail of anger and shame and exhaustion that Laura's name always triggered these days. Deborah was my old secretary, the one who'd known my coffee order, and apparently she and Laura were still friends, still talking, still exchanging information about my downward spiral like it was a juicy gossip over brunch. The fact that Laura had taken the time to text me just to point out how far I'd fallen, that was peak Laura. That was the woman I'd married, the woman who'd said failure isn't attractive, like I'd chosen to lose everything on purpose. I almost texted back something sarcastic, something cutting about how at least my blood was valuable, even if I wasn't. But before I could type anything, the automatic doors of the plasma center slid open, and my entire life changed again. The woman who walked through those doors didn't just enter the plasma center. She descended upon it like a yacht, pulling into a trailer park marina, completely out of place, but somehow making everything around her look worse by comparison. She was wearing a silk suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, had cost back when I could afford a wardrobe. The kind of perfectly tailored charcoal gray that screams, I have a personal tailor in Milan who knows my measurements by heart. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor with the confidence of someone who'd never had to check her bank account before making a purchase. And her hair was pulled back in one of those sleek buns that looks effortless, but probably requires an engineering degree and 45 minutes to achieve. She had the kind of face that you see in perfume commercials, all sharp cheekbones and elegant features, and she was scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. Behind her came 2 other people. A man in a dark suit, who was definitely security, built like a refrigerator with a neck, and another woman in business attire, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. They moved as a unit, this little trio of wealth and purpose, and everyone in the plasma center just kind of froze. The young kid with the face tattoos actually pulled out his earbuds. The woman who'd been checking her phone looked up. Even the old man with the nose tube straightened up a little, which for him was probably the equivalent of standing at attention. The woman in the silk suit made eye contact with Dr. Brenner, who'd been hovering near the nurse's station, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or just the understanding that happens between people who exist on different tax brackets but occasionally need each other. She walked over to him. Glided, really. Because women who wear suits that expensive don't walk like normal humans. And extended her hand. Dr. Brenner, I presume? Luciana Moretti. We spoke on the phone. Her voice had an accent that I couldn't quite place. European, definitely. Maybe Italian or French. The kind of accent that made everything sound sophisticated, even if she'd been reading a grocery list. She shook his hand with the efficiency of someone who'd closed more business deals than I'd had hot meals recently, then turned to look at me. And let me tell you, being looked at by someone like Luciana Moretti when you're sitting in a plasma donation center, wearing jeans with a questionable stain on the knee and a t-shirt that says, "World's okayest brother," that Kenny gave you as a joke last Christmas. That's a specific kind of humbling experience. I felt like a used car being evaluated by someone who exclusively drove vehicles with names I couldn't pronounce. Mr. Holt, she said, walking over to my recliner with those clicking heels that sounded like a countdown timer to something significant. My name is Luciana Moretti. I represent the Verrier family. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but time is of the essence in our situation. I gestured vaguely at the needle still stuck in my arm, at the blood bag hanging off the side of my chair, at my general existence. No worries, I wasn't doing anything important. Just, selling pieces of myself to afford toilet paper. Regular Thursday afternoon stuff. You said something about the Verrier family? Should I know who that is? Or are we doing one of those things where I'm supposed to be impressed, but I'm too American and uncultured to get the reference? The security guy's mouth twitched like he was trying not to smile, but Luciana's expression didn't change at all. Professional. Focused. She pulled up a chair, the same one Dr. Brenner had been sitting in, and positioned it next to me with the precise movement of someone who'd been trained in proper posture at some fancy European finishing school. The Verrier family is one of the wealthiest families in Europe. They have interests in construction, real estate, pharmaceuticals, and various other industries. The patriarch of the family, Adrien Verrier, is currently in critical condition. He has a rare blood disorder that has been unsuccessfully treated for the past 18 months. His doctors have exhausted all conventional options. And let me guess, I said, because I'd watched enough medical dramas during my unemployed months to know where this was going. He needs my magic golden blood that's rarer than common sense in a reality TV show. Precisely, Luciana said. And she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek phone that probably cost more than my truck used to be worth before it got repossessed. She tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to show me a photo. An older man, maybe late 60s or early 70s, lying in what was clearly a very expensive hospital bed. Even dying, the guy looked distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of bone structure that suggested generations of good breeding and better nutrition. Adrien Verrier. He's been searching through every international blood registry, every rare donor database, every medical resource available. You're the first compatible match we've found in 6 months of searching. The first viable option, Mr. Holt. You're quite literally his only hope. I looked at the photo, then at Luciana, then at Dr. Brenner, who was standing nearby, looking like he'd just won some kind of medical lottery by association. Okay, so this is obviously a huge deal for this Adrian guy, and I'm genuinely sorry he's sick. But I've got to ask the question that anyone who's been as broke as I've been recently has to ask. What's in it for me? Because while I'd love to help out of the goodness of my heart is currently being evicted from its chest cavity along with the rest of me if I don't come up with rent money. Luciana didn't even blink. She just reached down, opened the leather briefcase that her assistant had been carrying, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked official, with letterhead and signatures and all those fancy things that make documents look important. She handed it to me. $2 million, Mr. Holt. Wire transfer to the account of your choice within 24 hours of successful transfusion. All medical expenses covered. All travel expenses covered. First-class accommodations in Monaco for the duration of the procedure and recovery period. You'll be treated as a guest of the Verrier family, with full access to their resources and hospitality. I read the number on the paper. Then I read it again. Then I read it a third time because apparently my brain had stopped processing information correctly and needed a reboot. $2 million. Not 200, not 20,000. 2 million actual American dollars for giving blood that my body would just make more of anyway, like some kind of biological money printer that I'd been walking around with this whole time while eating discount hot dogs and wondering if I could return bottles for deposit money. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard that the needle in my arm shifted and Mia had to come over and adjust it, looking concerned that I was having some kind of mental breakdown, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth. $2 million, I said, trying to catch my breath between laughs that were definitely edging toward hysteria. Ma'am, you can have the whole gallon. Hell, you can have 2 gallons. I'll squeeze out extra if you need it. I'll do jumping jacks to speed up production. $2 million? I would have done this for 50,000. I would have done this for 5,000. I came here today hoping to get $50 and a cookie. The cookie's pretty good, though, the old man with the nose tube offered helpfully, and I lost it again, laughing until tears ran down my face. Luciana waited patiently for me to compose myself, which took longer than I'm proud to admit. When I finally managed to stop giggling like a maniac, she leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. Mr. Holt, I understand this is overwhelming, but I need to be clear about the urgency of the situation. Adrian Verrier doesn't have months. He has weeks, possibly days. We have a private medical jet waiting at the executive airport. If you agree to help, we need to leave within the hour. The medical team is already preparing for the transfusion. Everything is ready. We're only waiting for you. I looked down at the paper in my hands, at the number that could change everything. $2 million. Enough to pay off every debt, every lawsuit, every creditor who'd been calling me at 7 in the morning and 10 at night. Enough to start over, to rebuild, to maybe become the person I used to be before everything fell apart. Enough to prove to Laura, to my brother, to my dad, to everyone who'd watched me fail so spectacularly that I wasn't done yet. But somewhere in my head, cutting through the excitement and the disbelief and the sheer absurdity of the situation, I heard Laura's voice from that day she left. Failure isn't attractive, Travis. I looked up at Luciana Moretti with her silk suit and her leather briefcase and her private jet waiting at the airport. Well, I said, grinning like an idiot because what else was there to do? I guess we better get going then. But I've got to tell you, I'm probably the scruffiest medical miracle you've ever transported. I didn't exactly dress for international travel today. I was planning on getting $50 and going to the grocery store. Luciana stood up, smooth and efficient, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she smiled. A real smile, not the professional kind. Mr. Holt, I assure you that your attire is the least of our concerns. We can provide you with anything you need. All that matters is that you're willing to help save a man's life. Everything else is just details. Details? I repeated, looking at the $2 million figure again. Yeah, just details. Sure, okay. Let's go save a billionaire with my weird blood. This is fine. This is a completely normal Thursday. Why not? Before I could sign anything, before Luciana could whisk me off to her private jet like some kind of medical Cinderella story, except instead of a glass slipper, I had freaky rare blood. Dr. Brenner cleared his throat in that way doctors do when they're about to drop another bomb on you and want to make sure you're paying attention. He was holding a tablet now, one of those fancy medical ones that probably cost more than a decent used car. And he had that expression again, the one that said, I have more weird news and you're not going to believe this either. Mr. Holt, he said, walking over with the tablet extended like he was presenting evidence in a trial, there's another matter we need to discuss before you leave. When we ran your blood sample, we don't just test for type, we also run a standard DNA panel. It's protocol for our database, helps with matching and registry purposes. And well, something came up that you should probably know about. I looked at Luciana, who'd been in the process of making another call on her ridiculously expensive phone, and she paused, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised in interest. A complication? She asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice, like maybe this miracle donor she'd found was about to evaporate. Not a complication exactly, Dr. Brenner said, and he tapped something on the tablet screen. More of an unexpected connection. Mr. Holt, when we ran your DNA, it flagged some markers that connect to a very specific European lineage. I cross-referenced it with international genetic databases, and, well, he turned the tablet to show me a screen full of squiggly lines and numbers that looked like someone had let a drunk person design a graph. Your genetic markers indicate a direct familial connection to the Verrier bloodline. There was a moment of silence so complete that I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead and someone's phone buzzing 3 chairs over. Luciana's assistant actually dropped the leather briefcase, which made a thump that echoed through the whole center like a gavel in a courtroom. I'm sorry, I said, because my brain had apparently short-circuited and needed a manual reboot. Could you run that by me again? Because it sounded like you just said I'm related to the dying billionaire who needs my blood, which would be one hell of a coincidence, and also possibly the setup for a soap opera episode. Dr. Brenner nodded, completely serious. The markers don't lie, Mr. Holt. Based on the genetic analysis, you share significant DNA with the Verrier family line. Not immediate family, the connection appears to be a generation or two removed. But it's there, undeniable. You're not just a compatible donor randomly. You're compatible because you're actually related. Luciana had gone very still, that phone frozen halfway to her ear, and I watched her process this information with the efficiency of someone whose job probably involved processing a lot of shocking information on a regular basis. Travis, she said, and it was the first time she'd used my first name instead of Mr. Holt, which felt significant somehow. This billionaire you're supposed to save, he might actually be your family, your blood relative. I sat there with the needle still in my arm, blood still draining into a bag that now felt like it was connected to something much bigger than just a medical emergency, and tried to make sense of what I was hearing. Okay, no, that's not possible. I know my family. I know my dad, Daniel Holt, born and raised in Kansas, worked construction his whole life, taught me how to throw a baseball and fix a carburetor. My grandparents were farmers. We're about as European aristocracy as a gas station hot dog. There's got to be a mistake. But even as I said it, something was clicking in the back of my mind. Little things I'd never thought about before. The way my dad never talked about his childhood much, how there were no old family photos from before I was born, how he'd always deflected questions about where he grew up with vague answers about moving around a lot. The way he spoke sometimes, with this tiny hint of an accent that I'd always thought was just weird Midwest pronunciation, but maybe wasn't. I pulled out my phone with my free hand, the one without the needle, and called my dad right there in the plasma center, because this was not the kind of conversation you could put off until later. It rang 4 times, and I was preparing to leave the world's weirdest voicemail when he picked up. Hey, Travis, how'd it go? You get your 50 bucks? His voice was cheerful, relaxed, and the voice of a man who wasn't harboring any massive secrets about being a secret European aristocrat. Hey, Dad, quick question, I said, trying to keep my voice steady and casual, which was difficult, considering I was sitting in a plasma center with a multi-millionaire businesswoman staring at me while a doctor held up genetic evidence of family secrets. You ever go by any other names, like maybe before you became Daniel Holt? Maybe something that sounds fancier, more European, maybe something like, I don't know, Victor Delacroix? The silence on the other end of the phone was so long and so complete that I thought the call had dropped. I pulled the phone away from my ear to check if we were still connected, and we were. I could hear breathing, careful and measured. The breathing of a man who'd just heard something he'd hoped to never hear. Dad, I said, and my voice cracked a little because suddenly I was 12 years old again, asking him why Mom had left and getting careful, measured answers that didn't really answer anything. How did you find out? He said finally, and his voice was different now, quieter, older, with an accent that I'd never heard before, but that sounded exactly like Luciana's. French, refined it, the voice of someone who'd learned English as a second language and had spent decades hiding it. My stomach dropped like I'd just gone over the first hill of a roller coaster. So it's true? You're Victor Delacroix? You're connected to the Verrier family? Dad, what the hell? I'm sitting here in a plasma center being told I have rare blood that matches a dying French billionaire, and now you're telling me we're actually related to these people? Were you planning to mention this at some point? Or were you just going to let me keep living in poverty while we apparently had billionaire relatives in Europe? Luciana had moved closer, no longer pretending she wasn't listening to every word of this conversation. Her expression had shifted from professional interest to something more intense, recognition maybe, or confirmation of a suspicion. Travis, listen to me, my dad said, and now he just sounded tired, exhausted, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just set it down. I left that life 40 years ago. I changed my name, came to America, started over. I had my reasons, good reasons, and I never looked back. I never wanted you to be part of that world. The Verrier family, they're complicated, son. Money doesn't make people better. Often it makes them worse. Well, congratulations, Dad, because I'm about to be part of that world, whether you wanted it or not, I said. And I could hear the edge in my own voice, the anger and confusion mixing together into something sharp. There's a woman here from Monaco who's offering me $2 million to donate blood to someone named Adrian Verrier. $2 million, Dad, that's not start over money. That's fix everything that's been broken in my life for the past year money. And apparently, I'm compatible because we're related to him. So, you want to tell me what that's about? Another long pause. I could hear my dad moving, probably sitting down, probably running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. Adrian Verrier, he said slowly. He was my half-brother. Is my half-brother. I haven't spoken to him in decades. We had a falling out over the family business, over inheritances, over things that seemed important at the time, but probably weren't. I walked away from all of it. The money, the name, the whole dynasty. I chose a different life. Your half-brother, I repeated, looking at Luciana, who nodded slightly like this was confirming information she already suspected. So that makes him my uncle. I have an uncle who's a billionaire dying in Monaco. And you never thought to mention this? Not even when I lost the company? Not even when Lara left? Not even when I moved into Kenny's basement and started eating ramen 3 meals a day? I know how it sounds, my dad said, and I could hear genuine pain in his voice now. The kind of pain that comes from old wounds that never quite healed right. But Travis, that money, it comes with strings. It always comes with strings. The Verrier family isn't just wealthy, they're powerful, and power corrupts. I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to be your own man, to build your own life without the weight of that legacy. Well, I built my own life, and it collapsed, I shot back. So maybe it's time to try a different approach. Maybe it's time to accept help from family, even if that family is apparently French billionaires you've been hiding from me my entire life. Luciana spoke up then, her accent somehow more pronounced now that I knew my dad had the same one buried under decades of American Midwest. Mr. Holt, Daniel, or should I say Victor, your son is in a unique position to save Adrian's life. Whatever happened between you and your brother in the past, surely that's less important than giving him a chance to live. I heard my dad sigh, long and heavy. Put me on speaker, he said, and I did, holding the phone up so everyone could hear. Luciana Moretti, I presume? You sound like Adrian's legal team, always efficient, always persuasive. Fine, if Travis wants to do this, I won't stop him. But I want him to know what he's getting into. The Verrier family isn't just money and private jets. It's expectations, obligations, politics. Once you're in that world, Travis, it's very hard to get out. Dad, I said, looking at the paper in my hand with the $2 million figure, I'm living in Kenny's basement selling plasma. I think I can handle some family drama in exchange for financial stability. An hour later, exactly 1 hour, because apparently when you're rich enough to own private jets, you measure time with the precision of a Swiss watch factory. I was buckled into a leather seat that was more comfortable than any bed I'd slept in during the past 6 months, including Kenny's basement futon that had a spring poking out of it that I'd named Gerald. The private jet was exactly what you'd expect from people who could casually drop $2 million on a blood donation. All cream-colored leather and polished wood panels and ambient lighting that made everything look like a luxury car commercial. There were actual curtains on the windows, curtains, on a plane, like the sky needed privacy or something. Luciana sat across from me in a matching leather seat, her legs crossed at the ankle, in that way that people who went to finishing school probably learned in a class called How to Sit Like You Own Everything. She'd been typing on her laptop, some sleek silver thing that probably cost more than my entire computer setup back when I had a computer setup, for most of the flight so far, occasionally glancing up to check on me, like I might spontaneously combust or try to steal the silverware. The flight attendant, because of course this plane had a dedicated flight attendant, had brought me a steak about 20 minutes after takeoff. An actual steak, cooked medium rare exactly how I liked it without me even asking, with sides that looked like they belonged in a food magazine. I'd eaten it slowly, savoring every bite, trying not to think about how this one meal probably cost more than I'd spent on food in the past month combined. Now I was full, slightly drowsy from the combination of good food and the gentle hum of the jet engines, and still trying to process everything that had happened in the past 3 hours. 3 hours ago, I'd been hoping to make $50. Now I was flying over the Atlantic Ocean at 30,000 feet, heading to Monaco to save the life of an uncle I didn't know I had, with a promise of $2 million waiting at the other end. If someone had pitched this as a movie script, I would have told them it was too unrealistic. Life doesn't work this way. Broke guys don't just stumble into fortune because they happen to have magic blood. Except apparently, sometimes they do. You're very quiet, Luciana said, closing her laptop with a soft click and giving me her full attention. Most people talk more when they're nervous. You've barely said 3 words since we took off. I looked at her and this woman who'd walked into my life like a well-dressed tornado and turned everything upside down. I'm processing, I said. It's been a weird day. Hell, it's been a weird year. I'm just trying to figure out if this is real or if I'm having some kind of elaborate breakdown in the plasma center and I'm actually still in that recliner hallucinating all of this. She smiled. a real smile, not the professional one she'd been wearing earlier. It made her look younger, less intimidating. I assure you, this is very real, though I understand the feeling. The first time I flew on one of the Verrier family jets, I spent the entire flight convinced I'd somehow wandered into the wrong life. How long have you worked for them? I asked, partly because I was genuinely curious, and partly because I needed to focus on something other than the fact that I was wearing a t shirt that said World's Okayest Brother on a private jet heading to Europe. 7 years, she said, uncrossing and recrossing her legs, getting comfortable. I started as a junior attorney in their Paris office, worked my way up to senior counsel, and now I handle their international affairs and sensitive matters. This situation definitely qualifies as sensitive. Because the dying billionaire's estranged half brother's son is the only person who can save him, I said, shaking my head. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty sensitive. It's like someone took a soap opera and a medical drama and mashed them together. All we need now is for me to find out I have an evil twin, and we'd have the full set. Luciana laughed at that, a genuine laugh that sounded almost musical. No evil twin, I'm afraid. Though the Verrier family has enough drama without adding that to the mix. You should know what you're walking into, Travis. The family dynamics are complicated. Complicated how? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, suddenly very interested. Like, we don't talk at Thanksgiving complicated, or we plot against each other like a Game of Thrones episode complicated. She considered this for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Somewhere in between. Adrian has 3 children from 2 marriages. There's Isolde, the eldest. She runs the European construction division and is being groomed to take over the company. She's brilliant, ruthless, and doesn't particularly like surprises. Then there's Marcus and Claire. From his second marriage, they're younger, still finding their places in the family business. When you show up as the long-lost nephew who shares blood with their father, quite literally, there will be questions, concerns, possibly resentment. Great, I said, leaning back. So I'm flying into a hostile takeover situation where I'm the unwilling takeover. That's fantastic. Really looking forward to that warm family welcome. It's not quite that dramatic, Luciana said, though her tone suggested it might be exactly that dramatic. But you should be prepared for scrutiny. The Verrier fortune is substantial, billions in assets, properties across Europe, business interests in dozens of countries. When someone new appears in the family tree, especially someone with a direct blood connection to Adrienne, people pay attention. I thought about my dad. Victor Delacoy, apparently, living in Kansas, fixing cars, grilling burgers, living a life so completely removed from all of this that it was hard to believe he'd come from the same world. My dad walked away from all of this, I said. 40 years ago, he just left. Changed his name, started over. Why would he do that if the money was this good? Luciana was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the darkness beyond, at the invisible ocean somewhere far below us. I've read the family files, she said finally. Your father, Victor, and Adrian had a falling out over business decisions, over the direction of the company. Victor wanted to modernize, to move away from some of the family's more traditional interests. Adrian was more conservative, wanted to preserve the legacy. They fought badly, and Victor decided he'd rather have nothing than compromise his principles. He left everything, his inheritance, his position, his name, and disappeared. Sounds like Dad, I muttered. Stubborn as hell. I get that from him. Apparently. Stubbornness and secretly fancy European blood. He built a life on his own terms, Luciana said. That takes courage. Most people born into wealth can't imagine walking away from it. Your father did exactly that. The flight attendant appeared then, asking if we wanted drinks. Luciana ordered sparkling water with lime. I almost asked for a beer, then remembered I was technically still recovering from a blood donation and probably shouldn't mix alcohol with whatever medical adventure I was flying toward. Just water, I said. Regular water. Tap water is fine. The flight attendant looked at me like I'd just asked for dirt in a cup, but nodded politely and disappeared toward the galley. They don't have tap water on this plane, Luciana said, amused. Everything is filtered and chilled, probably better quality than most bottled water you've had. Of course it is, I said, because why wouldn't the water be fancy? The seats are fancy, the steak was fancy, probably even the bathroom has fancy water. Do billionaires ever experience anything that isn't fancy? Rarely, she admitted. It's both a blessing and a curse. You become disconnected from how most of the world lives. It's why some of them, like Adrian, become philanthropists, trying to balance the scales to give back. Others just don't care. They accept the luxury as their natural state and never question it. The water arrived in crystal glasses, because of course they were crystal, and I took a sip. It tasted like water, which was both disappointing and reassuring. At least something on this plane was normal. Tell me about Adrian, I said. Not the business stuff, not the billionaire stuff. What's he like as a person? Because I'm about to meet my uncle for the first time while he's dying, which is already weird enough without adding the fact that I have no idea who he is beyond rich guy who needs my blood. Luciana set down her glass and leaned back, thinking. Adrian is complex. He's brilliant, built the family business from millions into billions over 40 years. He's demanding, expects excellence from everyone around him. But he's also capable of great kindness. I've seen him personally fund entire hospitals in developing countries, scholarship programs for underprivileged students. He doesn't publicize most of his charitable work. He just does it because he believes wealth comes with responsibility. Sounds like he and my dad had more in common than they thought, I said. Dad's the same way, fixes neighbors' cars for free, helps people move, once spent an entire weekend building a wheelchair ramp for the old lady 3 houses down. Never asked for anything in return. Just did it because it needed doing. Perhaps that's the Delacroix, the Verrier bloodline, Luciana said softly. A sense of responsibility, of duty, of wanting to leave things better than you found them. I looked down at my hands, at the small bandage on my inner elbow where they'd taken what felt like half my blood volume back at the plasma center. I'm just a guy who lost his business and his wife, I said. I don't feel particularly noble or responsible. I feel broke and desperate and like I'm faking my way through a situation that's way bigger than me. That's exactly how everyone feels when they first encounter the Verrier family, Luciana said, and there was something knowing in her smile. The trick is realizing that they're all faking it too. The wealth, the power, the confidence, half of it is performance. They're just people, Travis. Complicated, flawed people who happen to have a lot of money and a complicated family history. And now I'm part of that history, I said, still trying to wrap my head around it. Travis Holt, former CEO of a failed demolition company, current resident of his brother's basement, now a member of a European billionaire dynasty. That's going to take some getting used to. You have about 4 more hours to get used to it, Luciana said, checking her watch, which was definitely a Rolex or something equally expensive, because of course it was. We'll land in Nice, then helicopter to Monaco. You'll have time to rest and clean up before meeting Adrienne. The medical team wants to do the transfusion as soon as possible, but they understand you need to be in good condition for it to work properly. Helicopter, I repeated. Right, because we're taking a helicopter after the private jet. Why not? At this point, why the hell not? Maybe we'll arrive riding dolphins. Maybe there'll be fireworks. Luciana's smile widened. No dolphins, but the helicopter does have an excellent view of the French Riviera. Try to enjoy it, Travis. Whatever happens next, whatever complications arise with the family, you're doing something genuinely good here. You're saving a man's life. That matters more than any of the drama that might come with it. I nodded, taking another sip of fancy water, and looked out the window at the darkness. Somewhere out there was America, getting smaller behind us with every passing minute. Somewhere out there was Kenny's basement, the plasma center, my old life as a failure. And somewhere ahead was Monaco, a dying uncle I'd never met, a family I'd never known existed, and $2 million that might just be the beginning of something much bigger and much stranger than I could possibly imagine. Hey, Luciana, I said. Yes? Thanks for not treating me like some hick who doesn't belong here. I know I'm wearing a joke t-shirt and probably smell like the inside of a plasma center, but you've been decent about all this. She looked at me for a long moment, something soft in her expression. You're a man who's had a hard year, who just found out his blood can save someone's life, and you said yes without hesitation. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are, Travis. The t-shirt is irrelevant. The hospital in Monaco looked less like a medical facility and more like a 5-star hotel that happened to have doctors wandering around in expensive shoes. We're talking marble floors so polished you could see your reflection judging you, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses, and walls covered in art that I was pretty sure belonged in museums rather than places where people came to not die. The whole place smelled like money and antiseptic in equal measure, which was a weird combination but somehow worked. Even the nurses looked like they'd been hired by a modeling agency that specialized in medical professionals who could double as runway models during Fashion Week. Luciana led me through a series of corridors that got progressively quieter and more exclusive, past doors with nameplates in French that I couldn't read, until we reached what was clearly the VIP section of an already very IP facility, and there was actual security here. A guy in a suit who checked Luciana's credentials like we were entering a nightclub, except instead of velvet ropes and drunk college kids, it was mahogany doors and dying billionaires. Mr. Verrier's in the suite at the end of the hall, the security guard said in accented English, probably for my benefit. The medical team is with him now, preparing for the procedure. Dr. Rousseau asked that you wait in the consultation room until they're ready. The consultation room turned out to be nicer than any living room I'd ever been in, including the one in my foreclosed house back when I had a house. Leather couches, a coffee table made of some kind of exotic wood that probably had its own insurance policy, and a window with a view of the Mediterranean that made every postcard I'd ever seen look like amateur photography. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the water in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost fake, like someone had photoshopped reality to make it prettier. I walked over to the window and just stared, because what else do you do when you're standing in Monaco after flying overnight on a private jet to donate blood to an uncle you didn't know existed 24 hours ago? This is insane, I said out loud. Not really to Luciana, but not to her either. Yesterday, I was trying to figure out if I could stretch a can of beans across 2 meals. Today, I'm looking at the French Riviera from a hospital suite that's nicer than anywhere I've ever lived. Life changes quickly, Luciana said from behind me. She'd settled onto one of the couches and was back on her phone, probably managing 17 different crises while making it look effortless. Especially in situations like this. Before I could respond, the door opened and a woman walked in who was so obviously Adrian's daughter that it was almost funny. She had that same bone structure I'd seen in his photo. Sharp cheekbones, intense eyes, the kind of face that looked like it had been specifically designed to intimidate people in boardrooms. She was maybe 40, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my truck used to be worth, and her expression was the exact opposite of welcoming. She looked at me the way a scientist looks at bacteria under a microscope, with clinical interest and vague distaste. "So you're the American," she said in perfect English with a French accent that made everything sound vaguely condescending. "The miraculous nephew who appeared just in time. How convenient." "Isolde," Luciana said, standing up quickly with the kind of tension that suggested these two had history. "Travis just arrived. He's exhausted from the flight and about to undergo a medical procedure. Perhaps we could save the interrogation for later?" "I'm not interrogating," Isolde said, though her tone suggested she absolutely was interrogating. "I'm simply meeting the man who claims to be family. The man whose father abandoned mine 40 years ago and is now conveniently reappearing when inheritance issues might be relevant." I turned away from the window and looked at her directly, but too tired and too overwhelmed to play whatever game she was starting. "Look, lady, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I found out I had an uncle about 5 hours ago while sitting in a plasma center hoping to make $50. I'm not here for inheritance issues or family drama or whatever billionaire problems you people have. I'm here because your dad is dying and apparently my blood can help. That's it. That's the whole story." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but maybe a slight decrease in hostility, like she'd expected me to grovel or suck up and was mildly surprised that I'd just told her to basically shove her suspicions. "My father's a very wealthy man," she said carefully. "When someone new appears claiming blood relation, it raises questions." "I'm not claiming anything," I shot back. "Your people found me. I didn't even know the Verrier family existed until yesterday. I thought I was poor because I made bad business decisions, not because my dad walked away from a fortune. So if you're worried I'm some kind of con artist, relax. I'm just a guy with weird blood trying to help out." Isolde studied me for a long moment, and I could practically see her reassessing or recalculating. "You look like Victor," she said finally, and her voice was softer now. "I've seen old photographs. You have his eyes, his stubborn expression. Yeah, well, I got his blood type too, apparently. Lucky me. The door opened again before she could respond, and a doctor walked in, tall, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of authoritative presence that suggested he'd been telling people what to do in medical situations for several decades. Mr. Holt, I'm Dr. Rousseau. I'll be overseeing the transfusion. If you're ready, we can begin the preliminary examination and preparation. I nodded, suddenly very aware that this was actually happening. I was about to meet my dying uncle and then literally give him my blood in a procedure that would either save his life or, well, I didn't want to think about the alternative. Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do this. Dr. Rousseau led me down the hall with Luciana and Isolde following behind like some kind of weird entourage. The security guard opened the mahogany door at the end, and we walked into a hospital suite that looked more like a luxury apartment than a place where someone was dying. There was medical equipment, sure, monitors and IV stands and all the high-tech stuff you'd expect, but it was arranged around a massive bed with actual bedding that looked comfortable, not those terrible hospital sheets that feel like sandpaper. And in that bed, looking pale and frail but still somehow dignified, was Adrien Verrier. He looked older than his photo, which made sense given that photo was probably taken before he got sick. His silver hair was thinner now, his face gaunt, but those eyes, sharp and intelligent, even while the rest of him was failing, locked onto me the moment I walked in. I saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something that might have been regret or maybe just surprise. Mon Dieu, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You're Vincent's boy. You look exactly like he did at your age. I walked closer to the bed, unsure what the protocol was for meeting your dying uncle for the first time. Handshake seemed wrong, hugs seemed presumptuous. I settled for just standing there awkwardly. Yeah, I'm Travis Holt, though apparently I should be Travis Delacroix. The whole name situation is still pretty confusing. A small smile appeared on Adrian's face, and I could see echoes of my dad in it, the same slightly crooked way the left side went up higher than the right. Holt is fine. Your father chose that name for a reason. How is Vincent? I mean, Daniel? I lost track of which name he prefers. He goes by Daniel now. Has for 40 years, apparently. He's good. He's in Kansas, works as a mechanic, grills a mean burger, lives a simple life, seems happy. I paused. He told me to tell you he's sorry for leaving the way he did, for not reaching out. Adrian's eyes glistened. Might have been tears, might have been just the medication, and he shook his head slowly. I was the stubborn one. I let pride get in the way of family. I could have reached out too, but I didn't. And now look at us. 40 years later, meeting through his son because I'm too sick to fix it myself. Dr. Rousseau stepped forward then, all business. Mr. Verrier, we should begin the preparation. The sooner we start the transfusion, the better your chances of positive response. The next 4 hours were a blur of medical procedures that I'm not qualified to explain even if I wanted to. They drew more blood from me. Apparently, they needed to test compatibility again just to be absolutely certain. Then hooked both of us up to machines that looked like they belonged on the bridge of the Enterprise. Tubes and monitors and beeping things that I tried very hard not to think about because if I thought too much about the fact that my blood was literally flowing out of my body and into someone else's, I might pass out, and that would be embarrassing. I cracked jokes to the nurses to keep myself from freaking out. If he wakes up craving ramen noodles in regret, that's on me. Those are the two things my blood is primarily made of at this point. One of them, a younger woman with kind eyes, actually laughed, which made me feel slightly less like a medical experiment and more like a human being doing something weird but noble. Luciana stayed in the room the whole time, working on her laptop but occasionally glancing up to make sure I wasn't dying. Isolde came and went, checking on her father, checking her phone, looking stressed in that particular way that rich people look stressed, like they're worried about things that cost more money than most people see in a lifetime. Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness during the procedure, but when he was awake, he'd look over at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe. Curiosity. Possibly regret for all those lost years with his brother. It was hard to tell. By the time Dr. Rousseau finally announced that the transfusion was complete and successful, that Adrian's body was accepting the blood without any complications, I felt like I'd run a marathon while simultaneously taking a nap. Exhausted but somehow energized. Drained but weirdly satisfied. You should rest, Dr. Rousseau said to me, already unhooking the various tubes and wires. You've lost a significant amount of blood. You'll be weak for a few days. We have a room prepared for you down the hall. I looked over at Adrian, who was sleeping now, and already he looked better, more color in his face, breathing more steady. He's going to be okay? I asked. The next 24 hours will tell us for certain, Dr. Rousseau said. But yes, I'm optimistic. You gave him a chance, Mr. Holt. That's more than we had yesterday. I nodded, suddenly too tired to form coherent sentences. Luciana appeared at my elbow, steadying me as I stood up because apparently my legs had forgotten how to work properly. Come on, she said gently. Let's get you to bed before you collapse. As she led me out of the room, I caught Isolde's eye. She was standing by her father's bedside, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look hostile. She just looked relieved. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't mention it, I said, because what else do you say when you've just saved your uncle's life with your freaky rare blood? Family's family, right? Even when you just found out they existed. I woke up 14 hours later in a bed so comfortable that for a solid 30 seconds I thought I'd died during the transfusion and gone to heaven, which would have been ironic considering I'd spent most of my adult life assuming I was headed in the other direction. The room was dark, heavy curtains blocking out what I assumed was probably an incredible view, and every muscle in my body felt like it had been replaced with wet concrete. Turns out giving a significant portion of your blood to a dying billionaire takes a lot out of you, both literally and figuratively. My phone was on the nightstand. Someone must have plugged it in because it was fully charged. And when I checked it, I had about 47 messages. Kenny asking if I was okay and where the hell I was. My dad asking me to call him when I landed. A few spam texts about extended car warranties, which was hilarious considering my car had been repossessed 6 months ago. And one from Laura that just said, I heard you're in Europe with rich people? Followed by 3 question marks, like the first 3 weren't sufficient to convey her confusion and probably jealousy. I ignored all of them, except my dad's. Called him right there from the fancy Monaco hospital room, still lying in bed because sitting up seemed like an ambitious goal I wasn't ready to commit to yet. He answered on the first ring, Travis? Are you all right? How's Adrian? I'm fine, Dad, tired. Feel like I got hit by a truck driven by a vampire. But Adrian's doing better. The doctors say the transfusion worked. He's stable. I paused, staring at the ceiling, which had some kind of fancy molding that probably had a French name I'd never be able to pronounce. I met him, your brother. He looks like you know. Same eyes, same smile, even when he's dying. I heard my dad take a shaky breath, the kind of breath people take when they're trying not to cry. Did he say anything about me? He said he was sorry, that he should have reached out years ago. That pride got in the way of family. I sat up slowly, ignoring the way my head spun slightly. Sound familiar? My dad laughed, but it was wet with emotion. Yeah, that sounds familiar, Mom. The Delacroix men, the Verrier men, we've always been good at being stubborn and terrible at admitting when we're wrong. I'm glad he's okay, Travis. I'm glad you were able to help him. Me too, I said, and I meant it. Despite the weirdness, despite the exhaustion, despite everything, I was glad. Oh, and I met his daughter, Isolde. She's terrifying, like in a could run a Fortune 500 company before breakfast kind of way. She thought I was some kind of con artist at first. That's Adrian's daughter, all right, my dad said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Smart, protective, doesn't trust easily. She gets that from her father, and probably from me too, if we're being honest about the family genetics. We talked for a few more minutes before I told him I needed to rest, which was true, but also I needed to process everything without his voice reminding me that this whole situation was basically a family reunion, 4 decades in the making. After I hung up, I finally dragged myself out of bed and discovered that someone, probably Luciana, because she seemed to think of everything, had left clothes for me. Real clothes, designer clothes, a pair of pants that actually fit, a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe back home, even shoes in my exact size. I showered in a bathroom that had heated floors and a rainfall showerhead and about 7 different kinds of soap that all smelled expensive, then got dressed in my new fancy person costume and ventured out into the hallway. It was early evening, based on the light coming through the windows, which meant I'd slept through most of a day. My stomach was growling loud enough to echo off the marble floors. I found Luciana in what appeared to be a private lounge area, sitting at a table with her laptop open and a cup of coffee that smelled like it cost more than a tank of gas. She looked up when I walked in and actually smiled, which I was learning was relatively rare for her. You're awake. Good. How do you feel? Like I donated a couple pints of blood and then slept for 14 hours? I said, dropping into a chair across from her. So, living the dream. How's Adrian? Improving rapidly, she said, and there was genuine relief in her voice. His vitals are stabilizing. The doctors are optimistic about his recovery. You saved his life, Travis. They're saying he might have only had days left before you arrived. Cool. So I'm basically a superhero. Except instead of flying or super strength, my power's having weird blood. I gestured at the coffee pot on the table. Is that for sharing or is that a personal coffee pot? Because I really need caffeine. She poured me a cup without answering, which I took as permission. There's something else you should know, she said carefully, in that tone people use when they're about to tell you something you're not going to love. Isolde wants to have dinner with you tonight. She and her siblings. They want to discuss the situation. I paused mid-sip. The situation. You mean the situation where their long-lost cousin showed up and saved their dad's life? What's there to discuss? I did the thing. I'm going to get paid my $2 million, and then I'm heading back to Kansas to figure out how to not be broke anymore. Pretty straightforward. Luciana set down her coffee cup and looked at me with an expression that was half sympathy, half amusement. Travis, you're not just some random donor anymore. You're family. You're Adrian's nephew. You share his blood in more ways than one. The family, particularly Isolde, wants to know what your intentions are, what your relationship with the Verrier family will be going forward. My intentions? I laughed, but it came out more bitter than I meant it to. Lady, my intentions are to pay off my debts, maybe get an apartment that isn't my brother's basement, and possibly buy groceries that aren't expired. I'm not trying to join the family business or claim some inheritance or whatever rich people drama you're imagining. I'm just a guy who got lucky with genetics. I know that, Luciana said gently. But they don't know that yet. And Adrian, well, he's been asking to see you. When he's awake, he keeps talking about you, about Victor, about wanting to make things right after all these years. I think he sees this as an opportunity to reconnect with the part of his family he lost. Before I could respond, the door opened and Isolde walked in, followed by two other people who had to be her siblings based on the family resemblance. The guy was maybe 30, tall and athletic with the kind of tan that suggested he spent a lot of time on yachts or golf courses or whatever rich people did outdoors. The woman was younger, late 20s, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she was evaluating everything and everyone constantly. Travis, Isolde said, and her tone was significantly warmer than it had been this morning. I'm glad you're up. I'd like you to meet my brother Marcus and my sister Claire. We thought it would be good to have dinner together, get to know each other, clear the air. Marcus extended his hand for a shake, and his grip was firm, but not aggressive. Thanks for saving the old man, he said in English with a lighter accent than Isolde's. We were starting to think we'd lost him. Claire didn't shake my hand, just studied me with those sharp eyes. You really didn't know about the family? She asked. Our father, the Verrier name, any of it? Not even a little bit, I said honestly. My dad changed his name before I was born. I grew up thinking we were regular middle-class Americans with nothing more exciting in our history than a great-grandfather who allegedly stole a horse once. And the whole European billionaire dynasty thing is news to me. Something in Claire's expression softened slightly. That must have been quite a shock. You could say that, I agreed. Right up there with finding out my blood is worth $2 million and I've been walking around with it while eating ramen for dinner. Marcus laughed at that. A genuine laugh. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Come on, let's go eat. The chef prepared something special to celebrate Dad's recovery. Nothing fancy, just a 7-course meal with wine pairings. He said it sarcastically, which made me like him slightly more. The dining room they led me to was exactly as ridiculous as you'd expect from a Monaco hospital suite that catered to billionaires. A table that could seat 12 but was set for 5, and with china that probably had its own Wikipedia page and wine glasses that looked like they'd shatter if you breathed on them wrong. The food started arriving immediately, tiny artistic portions that looked like someone had painted them onto the plates, each one explained by a waiter who took the whole thing very seriously. So, Isolde said after we'd made it through the first two courses and the conversation had been mostly polite small talk about my flight and the weather, let's discuss business. I set down my fork, or one of my forks, because apparently you needed multiple forks for fancy dinners, and looked at her. I thought this was dinner, not a board meeting. In our family, dinner is often a board meeting, she said with a slight smile. It's more efficient that way. Travis, my father is recovering, which is wonderful, but it raises questions about the future, about succession, about family structure, about the business. Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, I said, holding up my hand. If this is the part where you offer me a job or try to integrate me into the family empire or whatever, I appreciate it, but I'm good. I'm taking my $2 million and going home. I'm not interested in construction businesses or European real estate or any of it. No offense to your lifestyle, but I prefer my life slightly less complicated. Claire leaned forward, interested. But what if you could have both? Your independence and a connection to the family? Father's been talking about expanding operations to America. The Verrier name doesn't have much presence there. You have experience in demolition, in construction. You understand the American market. I stared at her. Are you offering me a job? After I explicitly just said I wasn't interested? I'm offering you an opportunity, Claire corrected. Verrier Development America. You'd lead it. Full autonomy, significant salary, access to resources and capital. You'd be building something, Travis. Isn't that what you wanted to do before your company failed? The words hit harder than she probably meant them to. Before my company failed, before everything fell apart, before Laura left and I ended up in Kenny's basement. That's a low blow, I said quietly. It's not meant to be, Isolde interjected. It's meant to be practical. You're family now, whether you planned for it or not. And family helps family. Father wants to help you rebuild. We all do. This isn't charity, it's business. You have skills we need, we have resources you need. It's mutually beneficial. I looked around the table at these three people, my cousins apparently, though we'd grown up in completely different worlds. Marcus looked encouraging. Claire looked calculating. Isolde looked determined. And somewhere down the hall, their father, my uncle, was recovering from a medical emergency using my blood, literally giving him life while they offered to give me back the career I'd lost. I need to think about it, I said finally. This is a lot. 24 hours ago, I was selling plasma. Now you're offering me a chance to run an international construction division? That's not a decision I can make over fancy fish and wine pairings. Fair enough, Isolde said, raising her glass. Think about it, but think seriously. Opportunities like this don't come around often, even for family. Back home 2 weeks later, I sat across from my dad at his kitchen table, the same scratched up table where I'd eaten cereal before school for 18 years, and watched him process everything I just told him. The job offer, the family, the fact that Adrian wanted to see him after 40 years of silence. He really said that? Dad asked, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. That he wants me to visit? Yeah. He's doing better, walking around, already back to bossing people around, apparently. But he keeps asking about you. Wants to apologize in person for whatever happened between you two. I paused. You should go, Dad. Life's too short to hold grudges, especially when the other guy almost died. He set down his cup and ran a hand through his gray hair that looked exactly like Adrian's had in that hospital bed. I walked away from billions, Travis. Built a whole new life here. Was it worth it? I thought about Kenny's basement, about Laura leaving, about selling plasma. Then I thought about the private jet, about saving Adrian's life, about Isolde's job offer that would let me rebuild everything I'd lost, but bigger. Yeah, I said honestly. It was worth it. You lived on your own terms. That takes guts. But maybe now it's time to have both, your life and your family. You taught me that failure isn't the end. You proved it by starting over. Now I get to prove it by going back. Dad smiled, tears in his eyes. When did you get so wise? About $2 million ago, I said, grinning. Turns out expensive wine makes you philosophical. He laughed, really laughed, and I realized the real inheritance wasn't money. It was knowing when to walk away and when to walk back. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, corner view, glass walls, the whole corporate power fantasy, watching construction crews break ground on what would become Verrier Development, America's first major project. My company. Well, technically the Verrier family's company, but I was running it, building it from scratch, just like I'd done with Holt Demolition. Except this time, I had billions in backing and a safety net that didn't involve selling bodily fluids. My dad walked in carrying two coffees, looking around at the space with that expression parents get when their kids actually don't screw everything up. He'd visited Adrian in Monaco last month. 40 years of silence, broken over expensive wine and a lot of tears. They'd never be what they were, but they were talking. That counted for something. Not bad for a failure, he said, handing me a cup. Yeah, well, I said, grinning at the callback to Laura's favorite insult. Turns out I just needed to bleed for success. Literally. He laughed, settling into one of my ridiculously expensive office chairs. You know the plasma center still calls? They want you on their donor registry. I go every 3 months, I admitted, not for the money anymore. Just because it reminds me where I came from, keeps me humble. Hard to get a big ego when you remember sitting in a recliner, hoping your blood was worth $50 and a stale cookie. My phone buzzed. A text from Laura. Her third one this month. Can we talk? I made a mistake leaving. I deleted it without responding. Some ships you let sail away. Luciana coming by later? Dad asked, barely hiding his smile. Maybe, I said, trying not to grin like an idiot. Because, yeah, the elegant French lawyer and the broke American had somehow become a thing. Life's funny that way. I stood at the window, looking at the Kansas City skyline, thinking about Monaco and plasma centers and how sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's running through your veins all along. Not just rare blood, not just billion-dollar genetics, backbone, grit, the ability to get knocked down and get back up. Whether you're broke in a basement or building empires with family you never knew existed. Lara was wrong. Failure isn't attractive. But redemption? Redemption looks damn good in a custom suit.